200 prisoners, 3 years of failed negotiations, and the war that had paused was about to start again over a single untranslatable word. Amir Hale taught mathematics to 11-year-olds in a hill town that had sent exactly one person to space, and she was the reason he followed the news. Corporal Lena Osai, his best student in 20 years of teaching, had been aboard the frigate Damascus at the border skirmish everyone now called the 9-Hour War. Humanity and the Ashen had collided over a disputed mining system, fought with shocking ferocity for 9 hours, and stopped when both sides realized neither had wanted any of it. A ceasefire held, diplomats shuttled. The dead were exchanged with full honors on both sides. But not the living. 200 human survivors from boarded ships, Lena among them, had been taken into Ashen custody. And for 3 years, through 41 rounds of negotiation, the Ashen had refused to give them back. They refused strangely. That was the maddening part, the part the news feeds chewed on nightly. The Ashen conceded everything else. They abandoned the disputed system entirely. They paid reparations without being asked. Their negotiators, by every account, wept openly when the prisoners were raised, and then refused again and could not, or would not, say why. The only explanation ever offered was one word, which the translation engines rendered unhelpfully as unthinkable. Now patience had run out. The fleets that had spent 3 years standing down were standing up again. The final ultimatum had a date on it, 6 weeks away. Amir followed all of it because of Lena. And because of Lena, he possessed something the negotiators did not know existed. For 3 years, his class had been writing letters to the prisoners. And for 3 years, somebody on the Ashen side had been delivering them and carrying the answers home. The letters had started as a classroom project in the first winter of the captivity, and Amir had never expected them to arrive. He had addressed the first bundle absurdly to the neutral relay station that handled ceasefire traffic, marked for the human prisoners in care of whoever is kind. 4 months later, a reply came. Lena's handwriting, unmistakable on strange, silky paper. She was well. The food was strange but plentiful. The Ashen had given the prisoners a building with gardens, and were teaching them their language, and had asked, shyly, whether the children's drawings in the parcel could be displayed in a public place. 40 more letters had followed over 3 years, from Lena and a dozen other prisoners the class informally adopted. Amir read them all aloud in class, and kept copies, and noticed things a teacher notices. The prisoners were not writing like hostages. They were writing like reluctant guests at a very long family gathering. They taught Ashen children mathematics and music. They were consulted about human holidays, which the Ashen then celebrated, seriously and slightly wrongly. Lena had been given work she loved, engine maintenance, and what she called, with no explanation, a household. And there was the censorship, which was not like any censorship Amir had ever read about. The Ashen redacted nothing about locations, defenses, numbers, morale. Only certain words came back neatly excised, and always the same ones. Every phrase like when you come home. Every variant of when you are returned. The word exchange every single time. Words of love, family, belonging sailed through untouched. Words of return were cut out with what looked like care, the way you might remove something painful from a letter to someone grieving. For 3 years, Amir had puzzled over it as a curiosity. Then the ultimatum was announced with its date and its fleets. And reading that morning's letter from Lena, finding the phrase after the exchange sliced cleanly away yet again, Amir Hale went cold because a hypothesis had finally assembled itself. The Ashen were not censoring information. They were censoring an idea they could not bear. Amir spent a week testing his hypothesis against 3 years of letters, the way he taught his students to test anything, and the stakes sharpened with every match. The fleets were moving. The news feeds tracked them daily. Humanity's border squadrons concentrating, Ashen formations mirroring them across the line, 200 lives and possibly 2 civilizations riding on a deadline now 5 weeks out. The negotiators had tried everything in 3 years except Amir was becoming convinced, understanding the single word the Ashen kept saying. Unthinkable. His evidence was a teacher's evidence, soft and human and cumulative. The censored words all pointed one direction. Return, exchange, homecoming, cut. Family, household, belonging, kept. Lena's letters described a legal ceremony she had undergone in her first year, translated loosely as registration, after which her living conditions had transformed. Another prisoner wrote about ashen neighbors who brought food daily and seemed, he joked, to be legally required to love us. A third described ashen children calling the prisoners by a kinship term, and being corrected by their parents gravely to use a warmer one. And there was the mystery of the deliveries themselves. Someone had carried children's letters across an armed border both directions 40 times for 3 years without one failure. Bureaucracies do not do that. Devotion does that. Amir wrote up his hypothesis in plain words, 2 pages, the way he wrote for 11-year-olds, because plain words were the only rigor he trusted. The Ashen have a law or custom under which a captive who is fed and named becomes kin. Our prisoners have been adopted. Returning them is not, for the Ashen, releasing hostages. It is casting out family, and the word for that is unthinkable, and they would rather fight a war they hate than commit it. He sent it to the foreign ministry, flagged with his sole credential, teacher of Corporal Lena Osai, holder of 40 letters. The ministry answered in 9 days, and the answer was not a form letter, because desperation makes institutions humble. It was a travel authorization. The negotiation compound stood on a neutral moon, a place of gray domes and long corridors where 3 years of failure had soaked into the furniture. And Amir Hale arrived there feeling exactly like what he was, a schoolteacher wearing his one good jacket. The human delegation received him with the enthusiasm reserved for a headquarters whim. The lead negotiator, a formidable and exhausted woman, gave him 10 minutes. Amir used them to lay out the letters, the censorship pattern, the registration ceremony, the kinship terms. He watched professional patience become professional attention, and then something rower. "We assumed the word was a threat," she said quietly. "Unthinkable. We modeled it as a red line about concessions. You are telling me it is a taboo, that for 3 years we have been demanding at gunpoint that they abandon their own children." "Adopted children," Amir said. "Our people. Both things are true at once. That is the whole problem, and I think it has to be solved as both." The test came the same week at the 42nd session. Across the long table, the Ashen delegation sat as they always had, tall, ash-pale, spectacularly patient. The human negotiator departed from 3 years of script. She did not raise the prisoners. Instead, reading from Amir's notes, she asked a question no human had ever asked. "Are our 200 people well? Are they loved?" The effect was extraordinary. The Ashen delegation went absolutely still. Then their senior member, an elder whose title translated as keeper of the household roles, did something the transcripts had never once recorded. He answered a question directly. "They are loved," he said, without hedging or protocol. "They are kin of 19 households. Their names are in the rolls. They are mourned toward every day because they grieve for a home we cannot give them without committing the unthinkable, and we do not know what to do." Then he asked, would the teacher of Lena Osai consent to be received, on the Ashen side, as a guest? Every human in the room turned. The Ashen it emerged had read the letters too, all of them for 3 years. They had been hoping someone like Amir would come. Amir Hale crossed the line 11 days later, the first human to enter Ashen space unarmed and by invitation, and what he found there dismantled the last of his assumptions. The prisoners lived in a hill town. He noticed that first, and it undid him slightly because it was a real town, not a compound. Terraced gardens, a river, workshops. The 200 lived distributed among Ashen households, and the households he saw within hours were not jailers performing kindness for a visitor. There was too much unperformable detail. The human height handrails added to steep lanes. The hybrid cooking that had clearly evolved through years of trial and argument. The Ashen grandmother who scolded a human engineer for missing a meal, in fluent profane Spanish he had obviously taught her himself. Lena Osai met him at the river bridge, older, steadier, in Ashen work clothes with her corporal's patch sewn neatly to the shoulder. She held her old teacher for a long time. Then she introduced her household. The Ashen family whose roles carried her name, 2 parents, an elder, 3 children who regarded Lena with uncomplicated adoration and Amir with awe, the teacher from the letters. He ate at their table. The eldest child showed him, proudly, 3 years of drawings from his own classroom. mounted and preserved in the town's hall like treaties. That night on the terrace, Lena laid it out plainly, soldier plain. "Nobody here is confused," she said. "We are prisoners. We want to go home. Every one of us even now even loved like this. And every one of us knows what going home does to them. Registration is not paperwork, Amir. When they fed us and entered our names, it bound them for life. Casting out registered kin is their deepest crime. The last household that did it 400 years ago is still a curse word. They cannot hand us back. They physically cannot form the intention. We have watched them try, and it breaks them." She looked across the river, toward the sky where 2 fleets were counting down. "So somebody has to find a third thing," she said, "between keeping us and casting us out. The diplomats have had 3 years. You have 4 weeks. No pressure, teacher." Amir spent his first 2 weeks in the hill town doing what he knew how to do, which was homework, and the deadline pressed on him every hour of it. The stakes now had faces. 19 households that would be shattered by a forced return. 200 humans who wanted their own sky back. 2 fleets closing on a date now 20 days out, ready to burn both answers to ash. Somewhere between keeping and casting out, a third thing had to exist, and it had to exist inside Ashen law, because taboos cannot be argued with, only navigated. So he studied Ashen law. The keeper of the household roles became his tutor, delighted beyond dignity to have a pupil who took notes. The law of kinship was ancient, vast, and utterly central, a legal system with the family, not the individual and not the state as its atom. And buried in its structures, Amir the mathematician began to see shapes. Kinship here was not a wall, it was a network, and networks can be joined. The breakthrough came, as breakthroughs do, from a child. Lena's youngest Ashen sister, explaining her family tree for a school project, mentioned casually that she had 4 parents, 2 here, 2 in a mountain town, because she had been sent at birth to seal a friendship between the households. Amir stopped her very gently and asked her to say it again. Sent, not cast out. Sent with ceremony, carrying her name in 2 roles at once, belonging fully to both. The practice was ancient and honored, the keeper confirmed, puzzled by the humans' sudden intensity. Bridge kinship. In the old wars between Ashen nations, it had been the instrument of every lasting peace. You do not cast out kin ever, but you may send kin outward to bind a new household into the family, and the sent one belongs to both roles forever, and the 2 households may never again raise hands against each other, because a blow against either strikes the child of both. Amir sat back, and the whole architecture assembled itself in his head at once, complete, symmetrical, and insane. The Ashen could not return 200 prisoners, but they could send 200 bridges, if and only if there was a household on the other end to receive them. And a household in Ashen law was defined not by biology but by the roll of names, the shared table, and the willingness to be bound. Humanity was about to receive the strangest immigration proposal in its history, and Amir Hale was going to have to be the one to write it. The proposal that went up the line from a neutral moon, under a schoolteacher's name with the negotiator's countersignature, was 11 pages long, and its heart fit in a paragraph. The 200 would come home, not as returned prisoners, but as sent kin, bridge-bound, carrying their Ashen names alongside their human ones, belonging permanently to both roles. Each returning human's family would be entered, by consent, in the Ashen household roles as bound kin of the household that had kept their child. And in mirror, matched by lot and consent, 200 Ashen would be sent the other way, scholars, engineers, elders, young people, to live inside human families who volunteered, teaching and learning. Their names entered in human registries that Amir's proposal invented on the spot and called, for lack of anything better, the rolls. 400 threads, woven both directions across the border. Under Ashen law, war across those threads would become the unthinkable, multiplied 400 times. Not because a treaty forbade it, because you cannot bombard your own household. And after the weaving, every fleet on that border would be aiming at its own kin. Amir expected years of committees. He had forgotten the fleets and the date, now 12 days out, which concentrated minds wonderfully. The Ashen answer came in 6 days, and it came not from their diplomats but from their equivalent of a Supreme Court, the circle of keepers, who had apparently wept over the text, which the human delegation learned was the highest form of judicial approval. The circle's ruling was one sentence, and the keeper of the household rolls translated it for Amir personally, his voice unsteady. The law has waited 400 years for someone to read it with love. Approved. The human side took the remaining 6 days, which everyone agreed was the two governments performing equality, and approved it with 3 days to spare. The fleets, poised on both sides of the line with their countdowns at 71 hours, received the strangest stand-down order in military history. War cancelled, reason wedding. They came home on a morning in autumn, 200 of them, and the ships that brought them were warships because the Ashen insisted, and by then everyone understood why. Among the Ashen, kin are escorted in strength. The size of the escort is the measure of the love. So the 200 came home to Earth's orbit surrounded by 400 Ashen capital ships in parade formation, hulls polished, gun ports sealed with ceremonial white cording, and every human defense installation stood at rest by prior arrangement, while the largest alien fleet ever to enter the solar system delivered its children to their other family. Amir Hale stood in the crowd at the landing field, one face among 100,000, exactly where he wanted to be. He watched the shuttles come down through a sky gone silver with escort hulls. He watched 200 people walk down the ramps into the arms of families who had waited 3 years. And he watched, walking beside them, carrying their small luggage with enormous dignity, the first of the 200 Ashen who had been sent the other way, scanning the crowd for the human households whose roles now carried their names. Lena Osai came down the third ramp. She held her mother for a long time and her father and her brothers. Then she turned and beckoned, and her Ashen family stepped forward, the 2 parents, the elder, the 3 children rigid with the solemnity of the moment, and the 2 households of Corporal Lena Osai regarded each other across a meter of landing field concrete. Her human mother moved first. She had rehearsed a greeting in Ashen for weeks, and she abandoned it and simply opened her arms. The footage of the 2 grandmothers meeting, the Shetland-born and the ash pail, each formally entering the other's name in the family record they had brought, each insisting the other sign first, ran on every feed on 2 worlds, and if there was a dry eye anywhere on either, it kept itself private. That night, 19 households on Earth set extra places at their tables. Nobody had to be taught it. It is, it turns out, a very old instinct, and it was never only ours. The war never resumed. It could not. Within a decade, the reason was taught in staff colleges on both sides of a border that had quietly stopped being one. The 400 threads of the first weaving had become 4,000, then 40,000. Bridge kinship, once explained, turned out to answer a hunger on both sides of the line. Human families volunteered for the roles in numbers that crashed the registry servers. Ashen households competed for human students, human elders, human newlyweds, with a gentle ferocity that became its own genre of comedy on both worlds. Mixed towns grew up along the old border like moss on a wall, places where the church bells and the household gongs learned each other's hours. And the fleet stood down, year by year, not by treaty but by attrition of purpose. It is impossible to maintain a war footing against a population that includes your admiral's granddaughter's other grandmother. The military historians, when they finally wrote it up, settled on a phrase that Amir Hale found funnier than he ever admitted publicly: strategic dissolution by kinship. The war was not won or lost, one of them wrote. It was married out of existence. The 200 lived their double lives, and their doubled belonging, which was not always easy and was never regretted. Lena Osai finished her service, took an engineering degree, and moved with her human wife to the hill town on the Ashen side, where her 3 Ashen siblings were growing up, and where the town hall still displays, mounted and preserved like treaties, 3 years of children's drawings from a mathematics classroom on Earth. Amir Hale went back to that classroom. He declined the ministries, the honors, the chairs, with the same mild firmness he used on students who wanted answers without working. He was a teacher. The work had been teaching. The work was not finished. But every autumn, on the anniversary of the landing, his class writes letters. The address has never changed. To our family on the other side, in care of whoever is kind. They are always delivered. There is, by now, considerable competition for the honor of carrying them. Years later, when Amir Hale was old, an Ashen historian came to the hill town on Earth to record his account. because the circle of keepers wanted the story in his own words for the roles. She asked her questions. He gave his answers, mild and precise. And at the end, she set down her recorder and asked the real one, the one her whole species still turned over like a stone worn smooth. 41 negotiating rounds failed, she said. The finest minds of 2 civilizations. 3 years. And the answer was found by a mathematics teacher reading children's letters. My people want to know how. What did you see that the diplomats could not? Amir thought about it for a while, the way he always thought before answering, because a question deserves it. The diplomats were asking what the Ashen wanted, he said at last. That is the right question for an enemy. But your people kept cutting the same words out of love letters, and you do not do that to an enemy. You do that to family you cannot bear to hurt. So the real question was never what do they want. It was what are they protecting, and the moment you ask that question of anyone, everything changes. Enemies want things. Family protects things. Most wars, I think, are fought by people who have mistaken one for the other. The historian wrote it down, and it is in the rolls now, on both worlds, in both grammars, listed under the entry for the war that was married out of existence. But the town remembers a shorter version. It is carved in 2 languages on the river bridge where a corporal once introduced her teacher to her second family. And visitors from 2 worlds walk out to read it and stand for a while and walk back quieter. They would not give back our prisoners. Thank goodness, thank goodness. We might never have learned what they were keeping instead. Kin, if this story stayed with you, subscribe. A new one leaves Earth every day.